when we were young, my dad used to make my brother and I go through hours and days where we couldn't criticize, condemn, or complain. And this was, I challenge anyone on this call to spend an hour trying to do that, both internally and using your words. And what you do realize is how our vocabulary and what we say to ourselves affects our reality.
Welcome to Empowered Kids TV, where we introduce you to the people and ideas to help you take action and create the family of your dreams. Today, our guest is a mom, entrepreneur, author, and public speaker who is the daughter of one of the leading spiritual teachers of our time. She holds a master's degree in psychology and education from Columbia University and has been featured at events such as TedX, Ideacity, Business Innovation Factory, and a host others more. Her varied background includes launching the Heal the World Foundation in the 1990s with Michael Jackson, being part of the initial team to relaunch MTV in India, and serving as a public health ambassador for the Pepsi Refresh Everything Project in the US, an initiative that gave millions of dollars to individuals, nonprofits, and companies for projects within their communities. For me, our guest is refreshing. Her openness and her honesty in sharing her own life struggles and the messiness of life journey allows her to feel like the mom next door, the mom who gets it, the mom who understands the struggle of the never-ending to-do list that we all have. So please, help me to welcome a woman who had to transcend her own expectations and sit and listen to bells with Eckhart Tolle as a reminder of living in the now, the amazing Mallika Chopra. Mallika, welcome to Empowered Kids TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited. I could talk to you about so many different topics, but today we're going to zone in on living with intention. And I wanted to start right there by asking, what is your definition of living with intent? What does it mean for you?
To me, living with intent means living a healthier, happier, more connected, and purposeful life.
Oh, I love it. I want to, at the end of my intro, I talked about your interview with Eckhart Tolle. And there's a few things that you share with your interview with him. But for me, the big takeaway was how he helped you to realign your expectations around what you thought your role and purpose had to be at different times of your life. Can you just share a little bit about the sitting and listening to the bells experience with us?
Yes. So when I wrote my book, Living with Intent, I came up with a list of people that I dreamed of talking to. And Eckhart Tolle was at the top of the list. Uh, because of my father, Deepak Chopra, when I emailed him, he responded that he'd meet with me, but I had about 9 months from the time I reached out until I actually met him. So that became quite an experience unto itself because I was able to dive deeply into his books, where he does talk about purpose a lot and intention. And we finally reached the day when I was going to visit him. I live in Los Angeles, he's in San Francisco. And so I shared the whole story in a TEDx talk. And basically, by the time I arrived to him, I was not feeling great. It was a day when I had bad allergies. I was stressed because I had prepared, and this was an anchor interview for my book. And I remember a whole long story, but basically ultimately making it to his room, where as soon as I was introduced to him, I was told that I'd only have 15 minutes for our interview. Now, you also interview people, you can't do that much in 15 minutes. And this was after almost a year of preparing. So I went into a fight or flight mode where, my body
Absolutely.
started, my heart started beating. I couldn't hear myself even speaking. My head was daisy. I felt like I was going to sneeze and sweating like crazy. And we sat down. And as soon as we began the interview, he heard some church bells in the distance. And he said, "Oh, let's just listen to these bells." And again, my mind went straight to, I have very specific goals I need to accomplish in this time. And instead, I had to let go and just listen to these bells with Eckhart Tolle. And I really had this both physical, mental, and spiritual transition during this time, where I had to actually relinquish, the intents and the goals and everything that, I had prepared to do, and just be present and in the now. And in that time, in that short, like, few minutes, he really taught me so much, just about being present. And I asked him during that interview, about what intention and purpose is, because it's something that I was always grown up to be taught, that we all have a unique purpose. And I told him, I'm like a soccer mom. I drive my kids from one activity to another, and in between, I feel like I'm trying to, launch a company and write a book and get permission slips to my kids' school and do groceries and dry cleaning. And I'm always feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And I just, I don't feel like there's like some bigger purpose. And I was feeling guilty about that. And he told me, which was so beautiful, that, each one of us has our own purpose. And what we are doing, we have to do with presence, with love, with connection, when we are doing it. So he said, there's nothing more special or beautiful that you can do than to be a soccer mom. But
Mm.
when you're doing it, do it with that sense of intention. And it really helped shift for me, this concept that, we all bring our own light to this world, in whatever way. He refers to them as frequency holders. We're all frequency holders doing our bit, to bring, more joy and purpose into our lives, the lives of those we love, and our communities.
You know what I love about that, Malika? I love sometimes we can get so caught up in the self-help movement of trying to find this bigger purpose that we lose sight that the everyday things that we're doing, especially us moms, right? Because the list is never ending. But the everyday things we're doing, they're just as important. And if we can bring presence and love and light to that, it's as meaningful as trying to spend years finding this big magical purpose that we're meant to strive after.
Absolutely. And I think for me, I've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about bigger ways that I can serve, but ultimately in my meditation, I always ask, how can I serve? And it's, how can I serve myself? And then how can I serve my family, my community, and the world? And it really does begin, with, finding that presence and peace individually inside. And then for those of us that are serving others, whether it's, our kids, our parents, our, communities, everyone serves in different ways. It's feeling, empowered and connected, and inspired, and really focusing on that love. And then I do think, in that way we're kind of creating, bubbles, ripples, a ripple effect.
I love it. I think most people would make the wrong assumption that because you grew up in a Chopra household, that being grounded and living with intent was something that just came easy to you and it just permeated your entire life. But I love that you shared that as an adult, you had to find your way back to intent. What I wanted to ask was about your childhood. Do you feel like as a child, because you had all of those habits, those grounding habits around you, that you grew up feeling that you were living a life steeped in intent?
So I learned how to meditate when I was 9, and when I have very clear memories of, as I say, pre-9 and post-9. So pre-9, my parents came to the U.S. as young immigrants. They had $8 literally when they landed here. My dad worked 24/7. My mom, had me right away, and my brother a few years later, and so she was a stay-at-home mom. And in many ways, their, story is, the American dream, that so many people, dream about. Whether that's true or not anymore, let's see. Um, but my parents worked hard. My father, though, was very stressed out. And so pre-9, my memories are a lot of, incessant smoking, drinking, fights at home. And then something changed in my dad's life, and he, engaged in this world of meditation. My mom, my brother, me, my dad's brother, my mom's sister, like as soon as my father discovered meditation, our entire family and community engaged in that practice. And there was such a shift in our family's life and in our community's life because of this simple practice. And so, yes, I feel so lucky that I was given the gift of meditation as a young kid. But what I like to share with people, because I think people expect, that I lived, in this very peaceful and like world, is actually that wasn't the case at all. I'm a very irregular meditator, like most people. I've gone through phases. I can look at decades now when I look back on when I'm a regular meditator versus irregular meditator, when I kind of connect with just taking care of my body, moving, eating healthier, and when I don't. And so I call it the messy journey. And, that's why the subtitle of my book, Living with Intent, is my somewhat messy journey to purpose, peace, and joy. And I've seen in my life that, there are times when I feel like really inspired, healthy, I'm exercising, I'm doing my meditation. And then it's like it unravels, but very slowly. You don't know that it does. And then you kind of reach this crisis point, whether it's, a health situation, a relationship, hating your job, feeling overwhelmed. And then it's like you have to relook at how you're spending your time, where you're putting your priorities, examining relationships. So I've had many of those kind of turning points in my life. And those have then kind of made me look back at like, okay, what are these practices that I learned as a child? So I'm very lucky I did learn them as a child. And I think they're just, and that's why I spend so much time now teaching kids, writing books for kids and parents, because I do believe when you have those tools, they help you throughout life. That being said, I don't want to give an impression that like everything's so rosy. Then life is messy. Life has the highs and the lows, and it always is. But it's more if we have tools to address them, any challenges, with kind of sobriety and intention, then we can make better decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities.
Have you looked within to try to identify what happens within life or even within yourself that makes you slip away from the habits of staying living in intent, so that you have those dips where you have that call to come back? Have you looked at what makes you move away in the first place?
I think life for all of us, is messy. We become complacent about things. We go back into habits. I, for example, am, always navigate towards sugar and stress eating. And if I look really deeply, I can see, the kind of emotional comfort that, baked goods gave in my life, even going back to my grandmother. But that's the thing. I grew up around a lot of kids and families who were on a meditation journey from the beginning. A lot of those kids grew up confused and with even more struggles. So I don't think there's a panacea to making life blissful, and I don't believe that. I believe life is interesting because of the highs and lows, and we're all going to face struggles. We all are going to lose people we love. We all are going to see pain and suffering in our communities. So, there is no, in my worldview, some utopia state of being, either personally or globally, frankly. But I do think how I approach it is, thinking about how can I serve both myself and the world, like I said before. And that's an iterative process, and we're all going to face challenges. We're all going to go off the path, but that's what makes life interesting. That's what creates our stories. And that's how we will teach others, and also live this life of intention. Life of intention is not just being happy. There are many more ways that we can serve.
What have you done differently with your girls? Understanding your own journey from coming from a place where you did have all of those practices and habits that was part of your family lifestyle to live with intent. And then seeing your own journey of going up and down, especially with your meditation practice. What have you done with your girls in an attempt to help them have those habits and to stay grounded as much as they can throughout life?
So, again, we're very lucky because I had these tools growing up. And so I saw the effect that they had for me and for others in my family and my community. So, um, my first piece of advice for parents is never force your kids to meditate or do these practices. And rather, I challenge parents to look at your own practice and look at how you deal with life. So, do you have a meditation practice? Do you take care of yourself? Do you sleep well? And then also, what kind of language do you use? How do you serve in your community? Because our kids are always watching us. And so that really is something I taught from my parents. They never forced my brother or I to meditate. Rather, they had a practice. We saw how it changed their life. And so then we kind of were intrigued and would try it sometimes and wouldn't, but they never chastised us if we didn't do a practice. Like I say to people, don't get stressed about not meditating, and please don't stress out your kids for not meditating. So, for me, with my kids, I taught them young. Actually, my father gave them a mantra, which is a way, a word to use in their meditation. But I've never forced them to do it. They also sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. In fact, it's really sweet. My younger daughter and my nephew, whenever my mom is around, they'll meditate with her. That's their practice.
Oh,
My older one has kind of found that it does help her, but that's something she discovered on her own, after years and years of maybe practicing, maybe not. So for me, the goal with kids is to give them these tools, and that's they're tools in our toolkit, and we find different tools at different times in our life. And so, that's why I've written now books for kids. And what I found is that this generation, um, in certain areas of the world, actually, they're they're already learning about breathing and movement, and it may be guised with different words. But there's a lot more understanding by kids of the mind body connection without having to explain all the science. They know what makes them feel better. So, actually, when I go into classrooms, I try to tell kids, you guys have a lot to teach your parents, actually. And so it is often the kids
always.
in this generation that are driving it.
As always, I love that. So we had a very similar approach to intent in our family, where a lot of the habits that I tried to cultivate or I learned that would be beneficial, um, I did the practice of making them a habit for myself. And my kids are the same. There are times where they go to the journey where there's like, ew, mommy, cringe. Yeah, that's cringy. Nobody needs to do that, mom. And then there are times when you can see that they feel particularly stressed by life circumstances, that they naturally gravitate it without having to be told to do it, because they recognize from just watching the impact of it within the environment, the benefits. And so it's something that they draw on when they need to, but not something that they do religiously.
And
As,
I
as
think that's great. And what I've found is, my elder daughter is 18. It's been a stressful time, I think, for everyone because of COVID. And for her, she finished high school virtually. She's not going to college right away like she had planned. Like, there's a lot of disappointment right now. But I'm finding that without even saying anything, she's turning to these practices because she knows that, they help her just kind of be a little bit more grounded with all of the craziness and natural emotion that's happening in our world today.
what I love about your book is that you kind of turn the light on for the whole journey, right? So you share the feeling of overwhelm. And I think that's true for a lot of moms today, right? the phrase that you described of getting to the end of the day feeling exhausted because you were going all day long but still couldn't quite pinpoint what did I do today, that seems to be commonplace for a lot of us. And what I love is that you talked about a balance wheel. And I just thought that that would be a great thing for us to share with parents, because it's a great place to start if you are feeling overwhelmed, to identify where to begin to make change. So can you share a bit more about that with us?
Sure. So, the story behind the balance wheel is also funny because I was very overwhelmed. And I realized one day while teaching people about meditation how overwhelmed I was. I was telling them to be present, and yet I was thinking about, the sugar I had just eaten, over caffeinated, all of the things on my to-do list. And so I had gone home one weekend to see my parents. In fact, because I was often overwhelmed, I'd go to my parents' house so my mom could take care of my kids and cook food for us, and I could just get a break. And so I decided that I was going to ask my father about, just this feeling that I was having. And I remember sitting next to him. He was on his computer, and I said, Papa, I'm feeling a little stressed and overwhelmed. And my dad just looked at me with complete confusion and then panic as he tried to find my mother to come and solve my problems. Because in my family, that's my mom takes care of everything, not my dad. And so then I kind of reassured him, no, no, it's there's nothing like major. It's just there is this feeling of just, you know, feeling overwhelmed, feeling tired, feeling confused, feeling unfulfilled. And so what he did is I actually watched him take this deep breath and go from like panicked father mode to Deepak Chopra mode. Um, and then he walked me through the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, who I believe you've had on the
I
show.
have, yes.
And Dr. Siegel has a mind body platter that he presents, which really looks at the different activities in our life that actually create stronger neural connections and healthy connections. And so my father and I drew this balance wheel that's in the book, and basically created an exercise where you really just kind of sit quietly and then ask a few questions. And what it does is it helps break that overwhelming feeling to break it down. So the
Mhm.
questions are, do I feel rested? Am I getting enough sleep at night? Do I eat healthy, nutritious foods? Am I moving enough? So first kind of beginning with that physical, but then really looking at, do I have healthy relationships in my family and my community? Um, do I like what I do every day? And, that's separate from, do I feel financially secure? And, sometimes we have to make choices there and trust our intuition. So then it goes into that. And then actually, where I realized that I was really suffering is, uh, do I feel inspired? Do
Mm.
I play? Do I laugh? Do I have creative time? And then, do I feel a deeper spiritual connection? And that may be through your religion, through your spiritual practice. So this exercise for me, and I think, let me see, I can just flash it for you. This is the balance wheel in the book. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes.
But basically, it breaks down the different aspects of how we spend our time, and both mentally, physically, and spiritually. And what it did for me is it helped break down, like, oh, okay, I'm relatively okay on the professional and the relationships. I always have sugar issues, but like I'm really suffering. I realized at that time in the creative, in the laughter. Like I'm so busy at that time that I didn't have joy in my life. And so what it did is it kind of first helped me calibrate where I need to work,
Mm.
set intentions to then find things and ways to bring that aspect into my life. And honestly, for me, it was like tinkering. It was like I started a book club with friends. So, we could feel intellectually stimulated. We could meet once every 6 weeks. Of course, every time we met, none of us had time to read the book. Um, but we had an excuse to get together, have some wine, and just laugh. And the amount of joy that one little thing brought into my life was really transformational.
You know what I love about there's a few things. First about the wheel, the thing about the wheel that I loved, there were parts and aspects of it that I forgot to consider for myself, like play. Like for me, I played for the kids. I
Yes.
played, yeah, not I didn't play for me. And I think that was one of the gifts of COVID because I had time with my kids. Play became different because there were things I definitely did for my kids, but then there was play for me and just doing things that I enjoyed. And so the wheel reminded me of all of the aspects of myself rather than just focusing on the typical things that we do all the time. The second thing I really love about that is as you focused in on some of the solutions to boost areas of your wheel, you really zoned in on who you were as a person and the things that were important to you. So in doing the book club, you could have just said, I'd read more. But community was really important to you. And so you found a way to marry both the creative element by staying true to yourself. Do you think that then gave it a whole different weight in terms of the value that it brought back into your life?
Yeah, so another exercise which was on that same page that I do in the book, it was this mind map, and that's how kind of uh, I came up with the idea, if you can see that.
Okay.
Um, so basically just asking yourself, what makes me happy? And what makes me happy today is very different than what made me happy 20 years ago. But I think we stop asking ourselves what makes me happy, especially when we become parents or have other responsibilities with other people in our life, because in particular, I think many women are always giving themselves to other people. That's just, we're the caretakers, we have the responsibility. And so I realized at that stage in my life, I didn't even know what made me happy anymore. So I had to really think about it. But the idea of the book club came from like different things. Like I realized like I love reading poetry and novels, which I hadn't done because of all my work for so many years, let alone time. I loved community, as you said, meeting friends. And I realized like I'd lost touch with so many of my friends. And because I was busy and they were busy, like, we've all been in this kind of crazy phase. I love good food, and I love music. I love travel. So, like, another thing that we did is when you put on, it's just like kind of playing the mind map. Like, I had music, travel, and food. And so I connected these random dots. And then I came up with an idea, which is why don't my family go to Vancouver for a vacation? We live in LA, but we went when Adele was playing in
Oh.
Vancouver. So I kind of combine, and there's our favorite Indian restaurant, which is in Vancouver. So I combined those, travel, music, and food, and I came up with this. Okay, let's go to Vancouver, go to an Adele concert, and eat at our favorite restaurant, and that became like such a fun family vacation for us. And so I think there is creativity in combining different things. So the book club obviously was also reading literature and connecting with friends. And so, we can find different ideas, but first we have to ask ourselves, what does make me happy at this time in my life?
I love it. Okay, you use the word intent as an acronym within the book, and I'd like to kind of go through each of those for our viewers so that we can kind of dive deeper and think about each of them. So let's start with I.
Mhm. So I came up with the acronym INTENT around intent because it's an easy way to
Yeah.
remember. So I is for incubate, which isn't like the most exciting word, but it really reflects a lot about what intention is. And incubate recognizes that sometimes we don't know what our intentions are, and especially at different stages of our life. So when we get pregnant, we don't just have a kid. It takes 9 months. It really it takes time to nurture. what starts off as a cell. When we plant a seed in the ground, and garden, for example, we don't know what the seed's going to become. We have an idea, if it's a rose seed, that it will become a rose, but we don't know what it's going to be. And so we plant the seed, we put the dirt on it, we water it, we let the sun and the rains come, and then it blossoms into something. So incubate really recognizes that it takes time to figure out what makes us happy, figures out what we want, figure out what we want to do. And incubate also stresses finding a practice that works for you. So for me, it has always been a lifelong practice of meditation. I kind of rediscovered meditation at this time in my life. But it may be for some people runs, exercise, yoga. It may be playing the piano or getting lost in music. And so we all have different ways that we find a connection to something bigger than ourselves, where we feel peace.
You know what I love about that? That it's not prescriptive, where you have to meditate for 20 minutes a day, twice a day. And then some people sit there and they struggle because that's not their way to go within. And sometimes I think if you really take the practice of incubating to heart, you sit and you find your own way. So I'm a meditator, and I've been meditating maybe for about 12 years now. And like you, I go on and off. Sometimes I'm really good every day, and sometimes I'm not. And in the last 2 weeks, what I found is that when I sit down to meditate, I'm called to listen to music instead of just my meditative practice. And today, for the first time, I fell into that deep meditative state that I usually get after about 20 minutes of meditation just by listening to music. And that was a real surprise for me, that there are different avenues that we can explore to find that same stillness within.
Absolutely. And so I think it is. One thing that I would, though, recommend to people is I find that a lot of people approach like yoga or running or whatever their practice may be, but they try to, listen to their podcast at the same time, or even at yoga, it like becomes hip hop yoga or things like that. So the only thing that I would advise is find your practice. So for you, finding the practice in music is beautiful because physiologically you're going to that same place. But what I would recommend to people is also be uncomfortable. I mean, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So sometimes, it is uncomfortable to just sit and listen to music, or to go for a walk or a run without talking to someone or listening. And so I think part of this process is also finding the ways to make sure that you're connecting in a way that physiologically is a good way to just find more peace.
Absolutely. Okay. So that was I. So now we're on N, the first N.
The first N is for notice.
Yeah.
Notice is noticing your internal dialogue, the messages that your body is sending you, and the things that are happening around you. So when we were young, my dad used to make my brother and I go through hours and days where we couldn't criticize, condemn, or complain. This was, I challenge anyone on this call to spend an hour trying to do that, both internally and using your words. And what you do realize is how our vocabulary and what we say to ourselves affects our reality. So when I was going through this phase of writing the book, my internal dialogue was, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, I'm frustrated, and so that was the reality that I was facing as well. And so that's a shift in noticing your dialogue, noticing your body. I am the kind of person who's always on the latest fad diet, whether it's juicing or souping or intermittent fasting or whatever it may be. But what I've realized over the years is that instead of, always trying the new thing, if I just listen to what my body was saying, obviously after having 2 double macchiatos and a chocolate chip cookie like I'm not feeling great. And so just really noticing, things that my body is sending me. And then noticing is also noticing the people, places, and circumstances that you come across every day. We're often so goal focused that we only kind of see the things that are going to help us get what we want. Whereas if we just kind of turn and talk to the person next to us on a subway, or notice that we were thinking about someone and they called us, like what are the messages that come across every day and the opportunities for new magic in our life, that can be really transformational on our journey.
I love that. Okay. Um, I love the notice your body in particular and words, because I think so COVID has given me lots of gifts, because I think it forced me and loads of families across the world to get still. It gave you a little extra time to kind of go in, and the words that came up, sometimes it felt like different voices. It couldn't be my voice, because I would never say things like that, right? So it had to be a different voice. But there were voices in my head that, as you started to pay attention, you realized that the programming was just a negative view of life. And that if you didn't take control of that, it would permeate to all of the voices, not just the voice that you had within, but the voice that you then projected. And I was really mindful about the voice that I projected, when I thought I was talking to myself, but my kids were listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the voice that I was sharing with my kids. And so I did an exercise of listening to the voice, and then out loud sometimes asking myself, whose voice is that?
Beautiful.
And then backing that up with, if that was my inner voice, my inner being's voice, what would it say instead? And just that practice for a short time, really, there was like a big spotlight on how much work I had to do to really change the inner programming of my voice. But for me, I think it's something that we so easily overlook, but it's so powerful because it permeates all of the experiences that we then draw into our lives.
Beautiful. I love that. Asking, whose voice is that? I
Whose
love that.
voices? Yeah, and sometimes it was, that's your mom's voice, and
Yeah.
that's dad's voice, and not in a bad way. Yeah, sometimes in a good way. Some because like you, we didn't have the language of mantras when I was growing up in my home, but they were definitely phrases that were repeated over and over. So things like my mom used to always say, there must be a way. And so that's kind of drummed into my head. And I say it so much, my kids say it now, there must be a way. And I always kind of focus on what's the possibility outside of the limited view that I might have now. And my dad would say, don't sweat the small stuff. And I sometimes still say that to myself. So we didn't know those things as mantras growing up, but they are definitely seeped into my subconscious and still guide what I do in positive ways at times. I think
Love it.
I also want to touch on your comment about listening to your body, because I'm also an emotional eater that would dive deeply into sugar when I can. And I love that you were open and honest about that, because sometimes we can excuse it away as opposed to recognizing that there is an emotional need. And if we're really honest with ourselves and we go within to listen to our bodies, we can find out what need our body's really asking for in the moment. And it's usually not sugar, it's something else, but the sugar works quickly. So I love that you shared that.
Thank you.
Let's go to T for trust.
Yeah, so trust is a hard one for me. It's trusting that when you ask yourself, what do I want, that you trust the answer. It's trusting your intuition. So, for me, when I asked what I wanted at that stage in my life, and at different things, we want different things as well. But I was always conflicted between, you know, uh, all the accolades and work stuff, and because I've launched companies and written books, and am an ambitious, often competitive person. What do I want, and then what do I want actually as a mom? And then thinking about, well, I don't think I could do everything. And so it really became transitioning from thinking about making sacrifices to making empowered choices. And for me, recognizing that at that stage in my life, honestly, the most important thing for me was finding ways to be with my kids. And, you know, what did that mean in terms of work and in terms of the practicalities of just finances and living? And so that's a very hard and individual choice that everyone has to make for themselves. And it's trusting the intuition, which is also saying sometimes we can't do what we want right now. And, you know, that is just not practical. And, you know, because we are responsible for ourselves and others, but at least listening to it, being honest about it, and then being empowered in the choices that we're making, so that we don't lose sight of what we want, and then we find other ways to bring it into our life. But, you know, I'm not a believer, to be honest, that, you know, we can do everything and have everything we want. I think there are different stages in our life where, you know, we find like the right balance. But I do think we can be empowered in our choice making, and, you know, make different choices at different times in our life.
There's such a different energy in thinking I'm making a sacrifice versus I'm making an empowered choice. Just
Mhm.
the words land differently. And I think what I took away from the book is that it really comes from going deep inside to trust the voice within. Because when you're trusting of the voice within, it no longer feels like I'm giving up something or I'm putting myself on hold, because you have to get so in tune with what you really want in the moment that you know it's about, okay, I have these choices, and of these choices, this is the one that I really want. And that's a different energy.
Yeah, it is. It's hard, but
It's
it's
hard. It's hard because it really requires you to, I think for me especially, I had to let go of all the expectations that everybody else had for me. And sometimes that's difficult. And I can imagine how difficult that would have been for you growing up in your family. And there's probably expectations that everybody wanted to have for you simply because of the fact that you're Deepak's daughter. Yeah.
exactly.
Um, so trusting yourself is a difficult one. Okay, so that was T. What do we have next?
E is for express. And
Yes.
express is actually, I think, an important ritual of stating what you want, because a lot of us are scared to say it. And so,
Mhm.
whether it's saying it, writing it down, sharing it with someone, but there does come a time when the incubation, noticing, trusting results into, you know what, let me plant the seed in the ground. Like, let me take responsibility for it, let me take ownership of it, and let me start to express it, which is the first phase to making it happen. And so, and I'll just go into the next letters because
Yes.
they flow into them. So N is for nurture. And nurture then is saying, okay, let me take care of myself. It's about self care, something many of us don't do. But it's also about learning to say no. It's about asking others for help. It's about also the vulnerability that comes with actually stating what you want. And then the final T is for take action. So, you know, this isn't just about like saying what I want and believing the universe will come and solve it. This is about setting smart goals once we know what we want. But when you know what you want, then, you know, everything else kind of conspires. You take action, you create smart goals, and you start to make it happen. So, like in my life, it was like, okay, the book club, the trips, but recommitting to a meditation, practicing, exploring, you know, my eating habits, things like that. So I think, you know, smart goals and taking action really is a critical part of the process.
You talk about not just diving deep for the big intent, so the big purpose of our life, but probably also looking at micro intent. I
Yes.
just wanted to touch on that. What do you mean by micro intent, and how can we use that in everyday life?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think, and myself included, I often felt so overwhelmed by like, oh my God, I need to have some greater purpose. And what is my intent? Like, as a question that seems so big. And then I realized, you know what? Intention is about every day. And so micro intents really are ways that we can bring intention into everyday life. So I give the example of one day when I woke up, I knew that it was going to be a stressful day because, I had to speak to my investors about something in business that wasn't going well, and my daughter was going to be homesick, that day. So unexpected kind of twist in like my responsibilities for the day. So I just set the intent in the morning that, my intent is to remain anchored in the midst of chaos because I knew it was going to be a chaotic day. And I just put the post-it note on my computer. And then every day, as I started to get crazy, which I knew was going to happen, I just see that intention and be reminded, you know what, take a deep breath right now and stay anchored. And so that was just like a micro intent just for that day, to remain connected, remain like breathing, find some calm in the midst of that chaos. And that was for that day what I needed. So I recommend for people is like, in the morning, set one small intention for the day. It may be like to connect with someone more deeply. It may be to be more mindful of my words. And so just set an intent for that day, and kind of check in with it throughout the day. And what you find is then over time, it's kind of like that incubation period. It becomes more clear to you over time what right now you're meant to do.
I love it. I learned about micro intentions from Deepak actually, and we added it to sort of a family morning ritual. So in the car on the way to school, we usually ask each other, what kind of day you're going to make today? And that was really good because for me, it helped my kids see that they had power in the type of day that was going to happen. It wasn't like a day that was going to happen to me. And then we would ask, what are you going to do to make that day? So if my kids said they wanted to have a fun day, then they had to think about, well, what do I need to do for it to be fun? And then at the end of the day at dinner time, we would talk about, okay, well, what kind of day did you eventually make? And it brought it full circle. And for us, it became a fun way of really setting and then exploring the intentions that we had every day. And it was such a gift for us.
Beautiful.
Before I ask my last question, I wanted you to be able to share where can our readers find out more about your work?
Thank you. So I'm on all social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook under Mallika Chopra. But I also have mallikachopra.com, where you can go and find out about my books. So we've been talking about Living with Intent, which is really for adults, but I've also now been writing books for kids. So I have two which are out: Just Breathe, which is meditation, mindfulness, movement, and more. Just Feel, which is on social and emotional learning. And then the next one, which will come out next year, called Just Be You, which is on self-reflection and intention. But those books are written for kids 8 to 12-year-olds, so they're super simple. And I'm finding that they're great resources for parents and teachers, and most importantly, as I tell kids, for kids to learn and have the tools and then maybe teach others.
Beautiful. All right, my last question. What does it mean to you to live an empowered life?
So to live an empowered life for me means every day to reflect on how I can serve. So serve myself, as I've said, but also serve my community and my world. And that question of how can I serve is really an anchor for everything that I hope I can do in this life.
Mallika, thank you very much for joining us and sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Empowered Kids TV Expert Series. If this is your first time with us, I'd like you to do us two favors. First of all, remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that we can notify you of all the amazing programs that we share on our channel. And secondly, remember it still takes a village. So please be sure to share with your family and friends if you found value in this program. As we always say here on Empowered Kids TV, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude, empower us. Until next time.